And a few weeks ago, or maybe a little bit longer, someone introduced me to Sarah. She's going through an interesting time in her company where they're fielding some acquisition offers and thought that I might be helpful. And the person who introduced us was incorrect. However, Andrew can be very helpful. And so Andrew is a friend of mine who has, how many people here have heard of 6 Degrees or have read some of Andrew's bio or know anything about Andrew? Some of you. Okay, good. So we're going to tell the rest of you. Andrew's a serial entrepreneur, I think maybe invented the term, has been in this game for a long time, started with the very first social network before Facebook, owns the patent on social networking that now has been acquired by LinkedIn to keep it open, if I have that story correct, has sold Xtify to IBM, has sold Meet Moi to Match, is a board an advisor, I think, of ClassPass, something on the board, something fancy that I'm giving him credit for a lot of companies. One of the people I respect the most in the startup world, and so big round of applause. Please help me welcome Andrew Weinreich. And Sarah has a very interesting story around Bookstr. So why don't we start with you explain to people what Bookstr is, and maybe explain what the site is for, maybe some stats on the traction, what's going on with Bookstr, and where are you today? Is that on here? You can take this one.
Oh, okay, thanks. I got it. First, I want to thank you guys for coming here tonight, and thank you guys for meeting with me. Aaron and Andrew, thank you for your advice, or soon-to-be advice, hopefully.
Take this guy. I'm loud.
You may be thanking me too soon.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the idea, right? Then you owe me, right? So, yeah, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Bookstr. It evolved from a company called The Reading Room. So I think that's probably the best place to start so you guys can be familiar with the history of the company. The Reading Room was an Australian competitor to Goodreads. It moved over here in 2013. I became their first American employee and was also their social media manager. I had been working for some digital companies at the time, and like Nike, Twitter, American Express, and so on. And so when they let me loose on their digital platform, it was pretty easy for me to garner a large community. Within the first year, we ended up with about 1 million followers on Facebook that were acquired organically. We had 1.7 million Google Plus followers, believe it or not, and they're still there, and some of them are actually still active. And we have now 50,000 Instagram followers and 12,000 Twitter followers. So that's kind of, that's where we were. We were the Reading Room. We were a Goodreads competitor, and basically the company ran out of money. Over its 8-year inception, it burned through about $8 million in cash through Australian investors. One of the Australian investors came to me at the time and said, hey, we're out of money. Do you want to, I can buy this for pretty cheap, like cents on the dollar. Do you want to be the CEO and co-found it with me? I had actually co-founded another media site on my own a few years prior and had always wanted to do something like this. So I said, yeah, definitely. Not really agreeing to terms, just kind of going for it, which in hindsight has really hindered me. But now I know. So now I've been doing this for 1.5 years. I felt like I was kind of scrambling eggs, and midway through, Alan, the investor, came to me and said, hey, I have a bee farm out in Australia. I'm really happy there doing that kind of stuff. This really worries me. Can you just let me, I just want to get rid of it. Like, I want out. And so that was a pretty big moment where, and keep in mind, I'd actually moved into our office. So, because I was just working enough where it ended up saving my time. So I'm living there as well in the office space. So I was like, oh God.
Super healthy environment.
Yeah, so healthy, like so healthy. It was like, oh shit, I need to move, and I need investment, and I need to sell, or, so many different steps. And actually what's been kind of amazing about it is we are, I wasn't done at all, but we've managed to do a great job this year growing our revenue. We're about 10K a month away from being revenue positive each month. And we are, our audience is still growing organically. We've put $0 into marketing. and we're still like growing across the board, but the numbers are slow because it's organic growth. So there's a few things that are holding us back, but particularly it's money. We did some financial analysis and realized that with just like 50 or 100K invested in a salesperson, we would be profitable within the next 6 to 8 months. So anyway, putting all this together, I've followed my investor's orders. He has put in about $2 million into Bookstr over the last year and a half, and I feel like it's very much my duty to pursue his interests. So I went to all of my contacts, told them the situation, and we've had about 5 or 6 acquisition interests. Of those, we had about 5 go into second or third round discussions, and now we are at the point where we have 1 real acquisition off, not quite an offer yet, and then just 2 people who would want to buy the assets of the company, which is just really a cheap way of getting the company. Something that I spoke to the guys about earlier was that a lot of the companies have decided to take a back door, and instead of they're closing the conversation about acquisition and instead going and saying, here, why don't we just hire you to build something again, and screw your investor. So that's kind of where I am in a nutshell.
A lot of good stuff in there. So let's start with one lesson, which is for those who are trying to build a social presence, what's the number one most important thing they can do to hit some of these numbers you guys have found? And are they all authentic? Have you bought any followers?
No, not one. Yeah. Also, sorry, I've had the flu, so my voice does not pass your inspection, but bear with me. The best thing that you can do, and I would say, is just be aggressive. We have a really, really aggressive social strategy, and you have to maintain it. You have to be consistent with it, but also, develop your voice. I think more than anything, a voice for a brand can do some really great things. One of my first companies that I worked for, the startup, was called Urban Delight, and I was studying day and night Groupon's voice because it was in the heyday of Groupon, and we couldn't work out how this company was just so like how everyone was using them. And I think to this day, still, like, voice can go really far if you can develop one online.
All right, let's jump into this sale. So the first, just to set some ground rules, we were going to ask you lots of information, and you can obviously turn down, and I don't want you to feel any hesitation in saying, oh, you'd rather not disclose that. So just to put that out there.
My lawyers aren't here, my investors aren't here, so I think...
There is a camera in the room, but it's up to you.
Yeah.
So the first question that has come up for me a few times in this is, why the hell is she doing this in a public forum? So I am curious, that question may or may not have also come from him. So I'm wondering, but it came from a lot of people, why would she do this in a public way? I'm wondering if you think that something like this is a smart move or a good strategic move when you're in the process of trying to position your company for sale.
Well, I think it takes a lot of courage to come up before a group and talk about something like this. But it's a difficult, one of the questions that I think you're curious about and everyone else here is curious about is, of the interest you've generated, how many of those offers can you bring to fruition?
Yeah.
And how can you generate a process where these expressions of interest turn into firm offers? And one of the challenges of a public forum is, part of building a process is credibly, to some people, describing your situation, and some of it is a little bit of puffing yourself up. And so in a public environment, it's a little bit tougher to puff yourself up. But I think, we did have the benefit of speaking ahead of time and with Sarah ahead of time. And I think some of the rationale will come out as we begin this conversation.
So you know where she is in this process, but what, if you were advising someone on how to position your company for sale, let's say she came to you 6 months ago, my investor's curious in this, what's step one?
Well, look, the reality is, when you raise capital for a business, the last thing that good investors want to hear is your strategy for an exit, because great businesses are built over a prolonged period of time. In fact, if you look at the best businesses, they're usually built over a 10+ period of time.
Yeah.
And so it's frankly scary when you're raising capital. I see this all the time with decks, and people will list who their potential acquirers are. I think it's actually one of the worst things you can put in your deck.
I used to tell my investor all the time, like, you can have your plan, but I'm building a forever company. And he
That's
was
right.
like, you're crazy. And I'm like, this is my best opportunity to do what I want to do.
That's right. Now, the reality is that good entrepreneurs, while they're telling the world that I'm building a forever company, are constantly evaluating, is this the best stepping off ramp? Is this an opportunity for me to recognize value and do something else? And so you're always walking that sort of dual personality role where there's this external persona and then there's this internal questioning of, but is this the best I'm going to do? And so I appreciate where you are. And, as we drill down, I think it'll be one of the topics that's interesting is why is this the right time?
Well, I have a lot of questions, but I want to start with I want to let you lead on where you want the discussion to begin as far as what she could be doing now or what she might have done differently up to this point.
Yeah. Well, so there's a number of places we should take this conversation. One is, for any of you, we all talk about how I have the greatest business ever and the sky's the limit. I mean, one question you have to ask yourself is, what is the value of my business at any given moment? And so that's a question we would ask Sarah, is we would try to divine a value associated with the business, and then we would try to ascribe that value, promote that value to these prospective acquirers. So what do you think the value is in the business? I have my own thoughts, but I think we should start with what you think the value is in the business.
Yeah, I've wrestled with this question quite a bit, and I've done, I can't even explain to you the kind of modeling I've done, and whether this user counts and whether this user is worth as much as this user, et cetera, down into every wormhole ever. I think basically what it boils down to, what I've come to, the conclusion is our most active audience is on Facebook. And the Facebook valuation right now is difficult to say in a purchase price because not that many people are talking about it or doing it. But
Can you share some stats on your Facebook engagement?
Yeah, so our Facebook's incredible. We're averaging 6 million video views a month. Our engagement is growing at least by 10% organically every month. We're getting at least 20,000 new Facebook page likes organically every month.
Sir, let's describe what you're doing on Facebook. You're interviewing top authors.
So we interview authors and give them a chance to really market their book. It's a pain point in the publishing realm right now, but we also do ad campaigns for the big 5 publishers geared towards our millennial audience, and then we create memes and videos, cartoons, graphics, quote graphics, articles, quizzes.
So let me put this on pause for a second. Typically, the way you value businesses is you look at comparables, similarly situated businesses that have some type of valuation that you can see. So in the case of public companies, you can look up what they're worth. In the case of private companies, you can often research the price at which they last raised capital. And you can determine for a set of companies in an industry that they usually all trade at a multiple of revenue or a multiple of earnings. So for example, if you looked at media companies that were generating revenue via advertising, you would look at all these companies, and on average, you would say they trade for 10 times earnings. Now, it differs by vertical. In the automobile space, maybe they trade for 5 times earnings. And maybe in the SaaS space, they trade for 8 times earnings. I actually don't know what the multiple is in the media space. But the challenge with a startup is there are no earnings. So we're trying to figure out what's the value of Sarah's business. Sarah's business loses money. So for these early stage businesses, we try to use another valuation metric to figure out what they're worth.
Yeah, and that's a tough one because walking into investors saying, hey, buy my business, but we're losing money. I'm not an idiot. Like, I know that's not appealing to anyone, but you're like, wait, but look at this. Like, look at the way that it's growing. Look at the ways we can monetize it.
But tell us the other valuation metrics you think are relevant.
So really just the Facebook audience, just the people there who are, to recreate the audience exactly, if you were going to buy everyone, it would cost you at least over $1 million, almost two. Like it's right around like 1.6. And that's including our Indian audience, our US audience, et cetera. That to me is a pretty solid metric.
So you think the value of the business is what it would cost to recreate a comparable asset?
That's a low value. It's unfortunate. It doesn't include like.
But that's not how people usually value a business, right?
Right. But like, this is where I am. You know, I'm like.
So the recreation value is a fire sale.
Yeah.
Right. So the way people would be more likely to value the business is they might ascribe a value to each person you have on Facebook. So you could look at other companies that have had large Facebook audiences, and you could see what they sold for. Have you done that at all?
We've done a little bit of that, but the number is so astronomical compared to the.
But what do you think?
What
do you think the number is?
For what other people have sold to?
Other people that have not had earnings have tried to value a business based on the size of their audience.
Yeah.
Have you found comparables for media businesses that sold without earnings on the basis of the size of their audience?
Yes. There's a company called Viral Nova and a few other ones, but those sold for like $200 million. And that was like in the heyday of media. So that was like 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Instagram?
Yeah, I mean...
Oh, same, you mean $1 billion sale with no revenue?
Yeah. I mean, a big piece of that is anticipated revenue, is this sense that the growth it's double digit and it's exponential month over month. And there's the prospect of significant advertising revenue. It doesn't sound like you feel like that there's significant revenue around the corner.
So there is. I mean, we just closed some big deals just this past week. Over the past year, we had to, within 6 months almost of starting this company, my investor and chairman was like, you need to fire your salespeople. So we fired them, and then it took another 2 months or 3 months to convince the industry that we weren't going out of business so that they would advertise with us again. So that has been slow. They're finally coming to us now for ad campaigns. So we just closed like 17 grand on one deal last week.
17 grand, is that a one-time?
Yeah, that's like a one-time, we're doing a campaign with them for 17 grand, which is like, that's the tip of the iceberg of the potential of what we could do. And not only that, it's with a publisher, and publishers have less money historically in marketing than some of the other like movie studios or video game companies who I would potentially want to advertise with us.
Paint us, let's take a step back and try this from another angle. Paint us a blue sky vision about this business fulfills your wildest dreams.
Oh, I have that.
Just describe to us, here's really a great opportunity as in story form, tell me the biggest realization of Bookstr.
All right. So I started doing this. We actually purchased the domain called Bookstr. And I wanted Bookstr to be our launching ground for other verticals like travel, beauty, movies, music, makeup. And everything that the Stir was going to cover would be tied to a book in some way, shape, or form. So it's a content site, but you tie books to it.
But talk to me about how big it gets. I mean, paint this picture for me.
I mean, it's huge, obviously. But yeah, it's big. It's rivaling to me like what the Huffington Post is or what Bustle.com is. They look at them, and I think we could do that in a better way and make it substantial and tie it to something that's in the real world, and do that overnight, I feel.
Would you describe yourself as a good salesperson?
No, but I'm learning.
Okay, I'm curious how much that's affected this process for you.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, it's terrible. And my investor is a salesperson, so he is very transactional, and he's used to having one for one, if not better. But yeah, I mean, I can sell a dream, I can sell a concept, and actually, I can build you a really great product. But as far as sales, it's taken some time, and I'm learning. I mean, it just takes, if it's not natural to you, you have to learn it.
Sure.
Let's talk about, I think did someone?
Oh, yeah.
There was just two things, because I've been watching your videos. So you are a great salesperson when you have the offers there.
Thank you.
So I think you're a great content platform. And so looking for subscribers actually is one aspect of it, but I think the sales piece of it that you're doing for the publishers is even better.
Thanks.
The problem for me, evaluating on Facebook, Aaron knows me, I'm in this industry
Yeah.
later. I hate people that value their site when their audience is not on their site.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're on Facebook, you don't own your audience.
Yeah. Let's talk about, look, the single most important question for Sarah I have not asked, which we'll get to in a second, which is what does she want to do? And then we need to talk about how her company is structured, because that's the single most important question. But I think one of the topics you asked me to talk about is what would be the process for selling a business, assuming the answer to the question, what does Sarah want to do, is sell, and assuming that the structure was a reasonable structure. And I'll talk to you about what that looks like, what I mean by that in a second. But the process that you would engage in is exactly what you've done. You'd identify all of the people that you think are prospective acquirers. And you would try to frame a timeline for people to generate offers. And you would literally say to all of these prospective people, you'd write a letter. And you would, in the ideal world, you wouldn't write it yourself. In the ideal world, you'd have a lawyer write it for you, or a banker if you were large enough. At a sub $10 million deal, you can't get a banker. So you would usually have a lawyer do it if you wanted to set up a process. But if you wanted to generate the best price possible, you need a process. You need people to feel like there's this competitive nature to this offering, that there is a time by which they have to express interest, there's a time by which they can get materials, there's a time by which they can do their due diligence, and there's a time by which they have to give a final and best offer. And the reason you wouldn't do that yourself is because it looks more professional coming from a professional other than you, and it gives you the ability to step outside and overrule the process that's not being implemented or that doesn't have the effect you want.
Yeah, we hired a broker, actually. Alan hired a broker directly to do this. And Ben, boss of Ben, he's been great, except we ended up not doing the process letter because we told them about the process letter, and the companies really flipped out. And they were like, no, we don't.
Which companies? Potential acquirers?
Potential
What does that mean,
acquirers,
they
yeah.
flipped out?
So, it's hard to say because I wasn't in the conversation, but they basically went from, we had two or three of them go from like, hey, I want to acquire you, to once we were getting into conversations about the letter, they were like, actually, I just want assets.
So it doesn't mean they flipped out. It means they weren't going to respond the way you wanted them to.
Yeah.
In fact, it sounds like a letter goes out and it says there's been an unsolicited offer for Bookstr. We thought you'd be someone that might be interested. And so by way of courtesy and to see whether there's a better fit for us, we're seeing whether you are. And you're saying when push came to shove, people said, we're not interested.
Yeah.
But they said, we're interested in what?
No, they're interested in the audience, and they're basically interested in parts. Some of the large publishing houses were worth more to them dead than alive, basically.
You're worth, what does that mean? You're worth more to them dead than alive?
So they, instead of advertising with us, it's better for them and their bottom line to, instead of advertise with us over the year, let us die and then buy the audience that we've created for pennies.
But if you die, the audience is going to die with you.
That's what I think, but they don't seem to think that, so.
That's bizarre. Let's go to this question that's the most important one, which is, you talked about you have this bigger vision.
Yeah.
But you didn't tell us if the choice was yours. The way you framed this to the group was that your investor wants to sell.
Totally.
If the choice was yours, what would you do?
It wouldn't. If the choice was mine, we would not be selling. I mean, it's for me. I feel like it's half baked. So we're selling something that's half baked because the majority owner and chairman wants out. And it's been nice that we've had so many large companies consider it as like an actual purchase. But you know, I wasn't finished by any means. But you know,
I wasn't finished, or I'm not finished.
well, I'm not finished.
So you still have the energy to keep going.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you say, you know, one of the things I've found is people may express dumb thoughts, but when it comes down to acquiring businesses, people usually don't make dumb decisions.
Yeah.
So when you say they wanted to acquire the audience,
Yeah.
they can't believe that if you stop interviewing authors, that the audience isn't going to die on the spot with you. They can't believe that, right?
I don't know. I mean, what the ones that have come to me and said, you know, there's been a few different parties, right? But the ones who have backed out of the deal and then side channeled it and said, hey, why don't we just hire you instead? They've all said to me, hey, you are the company, that's why we can't do it.
So I want to be really clear. I understand this. When you describe the million, it's a million views or 6 million views on Facebook
we
a month.
6 million average a month.
So the 6 million views on Facebook a month, that's you interviewing
No.
people?
I mean, that's not me. That's like me, my partner Scott, and then we have, you know, some interns who are helping us out as well.
But it's the team.
It's a team, yeah.
It's the team interviewing people.
Interviewing people, but also creating memes, creating videos, infotainment videos, that kind of stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it's. I have friends that go out and like interview. They have their own shows. Like, yeah, it's not even close to.
How
what
many
it could be.
videos does the 6 million views represent? Do you know? Or how many you publish each month on average?
Yeah, I do actually. I have it here, but I think it's like 150 a month.
Yeah.
So we're producing about 450 pieces of content each month.
I'd love to get to this personal piece. What percentage of the company do you own?
4% of the company.
And did everyone hear that? 4%.
4. It's
And-
embarrassing.
And it's not embarrassing. You negotiated
I
the
would have
deal.
never agreed to this.
And what percent
with
does the
them.
rest of your team own?
Well, actually, none. My partner Scott, he owns none. Although it's been promised verbally, like, hey, get an exit, I'll get you sorted, that kind of stuff.
No smart acquirer
Yeah.
would buy this business.
Yeah.
None. And the reason is because when acquirers buy early stage businesses, they know that most of the asset they're acquiring is the team.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the recurring phrases you'll hear are acqui-hires, where a company like Facebook will acquire a company just for the people. Sometimes they'll even pay as much as $1 million or $2 million per developer.
Yeah.
And I don't know Facebook specifically, but tech companies will attach a multiple per developer. And so for a company like yours, if the team doesn't own a sizable piece, they won't acquire the business. And the reason they won't acquire the business is because they know that the team has got no motivation to stay. And if they want to keep the team, after acquiring the business, they have to pay up for the team. That's the point where teams usually get smart. Teams usually starved. They got underpaid while they were at the startup, and then they turn around to the acquirer and they say, now pay me market.
Right.
So if you and your team don't own, I would say for an early stage business, 20%, I don't see a path where you're acquired.
Yeah.
And that's probably why you're generating these conversations where people are saying to you, Sarah, we love the presentation, but when your investor's not here, come work for us instead of sell the business. So it sounds like you have a choice. I think the right thing to do is to say to your investor, I feel a sense of loyalty towards you,
Yeah.
and you put in $2 million into this business, but if you want to sell, there's no path to sell without giving the entire team a sizable equity piece.
Yeah.
And it may sound self-serving as you say it,
Yeah.
but there's no path to a sale.
I know. It's tough. I think that's great advice, and I'll hopefully be able to send in this video, but actually told him, while we went to go, I did investment rounds on his behalf.
No one would invest.
No, and they said, how much do you own? And then I would tell them, and they're like, what are you thinking?
No one would invest.
Like,
So why did you proceed? I mean, you got this advice early on.
This was like the best opportunity that I had, but I also I sold everything.
But why don't you view it like
Yeah.
what you've accomplished is rock star status, right? This idea that you've grown an audience from 15,000 uniques
Yeah.
to 1 million uniques.
Yeah.
I keep getting the numbers wrong. 6 million.
It's a
uniques?
lot.
It's crazy.
To a lot
Yeah,
of
I know,
uniques.
it's nuts.
That's rock star status. Why wouldn't you view it like I could replicate the success somewhere else?
I don't know. I mean, I've been with this audience since the beginning. So for me to kind of take a step back and say, like, what I say instead is like, I can do it again with different people. But like, I know these people. I know the super users or whatever.
What separates the people that do what you do is not a familiarity with the audience.
Yeah.
It's this relentlessness.
Yeah.
It's this acquisition of a base level of skills, and then it's a relentlessness. And it sounds like you have that.
Totally.
So I don't know why you wouldn't say to your investors, look, I really am looking out for you,
Yeah.
but I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste mine.
Yeah.
And there is no path. There is no path.
Yeah.
And by the way, 20% is probably the low side, given it'd be one thing, the bigger you get, the smaller percentage the team can have.
Yeah.
Right? But an uninvolved founder having 80%, I get it. He wants his liquidation preference. I get it. It's his money. But I also get it. He will end up with zero if he doesn't adjust the cap table.
Yeah. I mean,
And by the way, people do it all the time.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, first of all, as well, like, I wanted the opportunity to be the CEO and to learn, which he gave me. But also, I didn't have the cash to go. I'm still almost paycheck to paycheck in New York, so it's like to say that I'm going to leave and do what? Like, I'm not going to go back home to Texas. I don't. I didn't want to actively pursue.
If you take this
something.
video and it goes out to Aaron's Meetup list, you'll have a dozen offers.
We're
by the end of
hiring
the
at
year.
Propelify, you may have heard earlier.
I mean that sincerely. Like what you're describing.
Well, I want to land on this one point, though, because it does strike me that you seem tired of this experience.
I'm tired of this. Like, experience is like I'm living in a transition all the time.
Sure.
I've been looking for investment, or I've been looking for a buyer or whatever, almost since the beginning of the company. And to me, that's not the fun part. Like, the fun part is building something and building a team and iterating off of that. And that to me is so much fun.
I don't think she
Super
sounds
strong.
tired. I think she sounds like a woman who is ready to box, and someone saying,
Thank
"I'm going
you.
to tie your hands behind your back."
Yeah, that's how I
And
feel.
she's finally recognizing that her odds of winning a boxing match with her hands tied behind her back are low.
Yeah.
And so there does come a point where you have to say, either you untie my hands,
Yeah.
or I can't keep getting in the ring.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point where you're at. And if you don't solve this problem here, it will manifest itself somewhere else in
Oh, I
another
know.
form. Like, it's time to say, you're capable of making a lot of money. It strikes me like you might be able to raise money for this business.
Yeah.
It strikes me like there might be a realization of this, but it's a fundamental realignment. Like, in any investor that comes in, there are parameters that investors have. The percentage they want to own, right? Their influence, their seat on the board, their veto rights. And they're going to look to cram down your investor too. So what this requires, maybe that's the reason you wanted to do this tonight, so you could record and give something to your investor. But either there's a realignment, or just the likelihood of being able to exit, or the likelihood of being able to raise capital is low.
Well, it's nice, like, it's everything that you're saying is stuff that I've said before, but now we've lived through it. And so it's pretty much, for the most part, all come true. And so now it's like, I wish I would have spoken to you about 6 months ago, but even so, I probably still would have had to do the things that I did.
The irony is, you can't look back. The irony is that, first of all, the options that if your investor were to grant you are only dilutive over time, right?
Yeah.
They would vest to you over time. And it may be what makes most sense for your investor is to put in more money.
Yeah.
It may be that no one else is willing to put in money where there's one person who owns so much of the company, and you've yet to hit an inflection point. So I think your investor has a lot of options. But I think you've got to figure out how to take off the handcuffs.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the sale process, I can't imagine someone saying, I'm going to pay, the numbers you told me before here where people were floating a number. Your investor wanted $2 million,
Yeah.
and you thought that was on the high end of what people would pay. Essentially, he wanted his money back.
Yeah, I mean, originally he wanted 10 million, then it went down to 5, then it was 2.
Now he'd be thrilled to get his money back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
So what if she goes to him and he says, okay, we can redo the cap table. I can get you closer to whole. Maybe it's 10% for her and 10% for the team.
First of all, that probably wouldn't do it. But what would she do?
Well, but what if he adds qualifications like if you are able to position for a sale, if you can show that we can go raise $2 million. Like,
Part of the problem.
all the batteries are dead here. Here.
I don't think we're dead.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll go red.
Part of the problem is, for such an early stage business, ideally you would be pursuing what's called a dual track.
Mm-hmm.
So ideally what you'd be saying to people is, ideally you'd be saying to Aaron, why don't you pay for batteries? You got pizza, but no batteries. Ideally what you'd be saying to people, not only are you bidding against 5 other companies, but there are 3 venture firms that are looking at this.
yeah.
And you'd say, my preferred route is to grow.
Yeah, that is my preferred route.
You'd mean it when you said it. And when I say you mean it, you'd have credible interest from venture investors. And your valuation would not just be a function of what the asset is worth, what this group, this team is worth, but it would also be paying you to take your dream off the table.
Yeah.
And so companies that have the ability to raise capital will sell at a dramatic premium over companies that have just quit. Like, you've positioned this as a fire sale.
Yeah.
It sounds like a fire sale.
Yeah.
It smells like a fire sale, right? That's the worst.
Yeah.
So ideally, you take your company off the market.
Yeah.
You'd figure out how to rejigger the cap table. You would rebuild your business plan. You would start speaking to investors. Mm-hmm. And then maybe you would continue speaking to potential acquirers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be an option that I would do. I think in the meantime, Alan, my investor, keeps saying, like, we can't draw this out anymore. He doesn't want to keep paying our paychecks. So that's something that's like...
I feel for him. I mean,
Yeah,
I feel for him. I mean, he's got $2 million in the business. It's bleeding cash. And he's, on the other hand, it sounds like, a lot of companies in your shoes are bleeding cash, but the traffic's declining. Engagement's declining. In your case, engagement's growing.
Yeah.
So, to some extent, his rush for the exits may be sabotaging his ultimate goal.
Totally.
Do you get the sense that he is willing to just walk away from this?
Yeah, I mean, I think from what I know, his wife's pressuring him, and his wife's like pressuring him, and he like is retired and he has bees now, and he's like doesn't want to do this. This to him is a headache.
Work on the bees.
Yeah, he's like, and not only that, but he's halfway around the world, and he's like putting money in every month, and he's like, where's it going? He doesn't. We do what we can to show him what we're doing every day, but he doesn't see it and live it and breathe it.
Yeah.
So what can she do tomorrow? What would your prescription be? I mean, you give a high level view, but are you thinking that she tells him, I'm going to do
He's in
this?
town next week. I'll send him over.
Sounds like it's going to go great.
It's not.
We should do a follow-up meeting.
It's not tell him. It's a discussion. Like, at some level, you're his partner.
Absolutely.
But it
Does he
doesn't
treat you that way?
No. I mean, I'm a doer. I'm his.
Well, doers can be partners.
Yeah, sure. I would.
Does he respect your opinion?
Sometimes I think a lot of the things that I've wanted to do have, a lot of what I end up doing is executing what he wants or what he'll put other people into place and then executing what they want. So, that's what this, there's been a few things like that.
Does everyone there report to you, or do some of those people report up to him?
One person reports up to him.
Why?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, what's the answer?
I think he likes to, that's a good dynamic for him, I think.
But is it good for you?
No, it's terrible for me.
What do you think your worth is, your salary worth is to a company other than Bookstr?
I mean, I've been getting offers like recently that are like in the hundreds of thousands a year, which is cool. That's cool for me
And
to
do you
hear.
want to tell us what you're making now?
Yeah, I'm making 100,000, but I'm paying 15%. Or I'm paying $1,500 a month in rent. So
To sleep at the company headquarters?
yeah,
Does the company pay rent?
yeah.
What?
So like they got like the company was tired of paying all the rent.
I'm sorry. No, this has nothing to do with Sarah, but if you know, I know you're building your own social presence.
Yeah.
If you could just cut that clip of you saying, I don't even want to repeat how you said what.
Yeah,
Do my own little meme.
I think that would be precious.
it's mind-boggling. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like, I can't understand why you're not, like if the outside world is telling you what your worth is, if the prospective investors are telling you what your worth is,
This is new. The
and you're
outside
paying
world doing
rent
this.
to your boss,
Yeah.
we're missing something.
No, I mean that's all been new, but also like I was the first. There's a lot of people, like the reading room investors and people, who kind of put me in this position, and like I didn't want to let them down. I don't want to let them down, and I don't give up on.
I think this is a blessing for you. I think that
Yeah.
the reason I think it's a blessing for you is because I think the market is telling you you've run as far as you can.
Yeah.
And if you don't change, this isn't about endless dedication. It's not about endless loyalty. You've run as far as you can. I would tell everyone that this is a significant challenge I think a lot of people have is what's the right equity for me and what's the right salary for me. And there's studies on this. Like there are studies that if you have a company that has raised $2 million and you're generating sub $100,000 or sub $200,000 in revenue, and you're a CEO and you joined at this stage, this is the appropriate equity level.
Well, and you own this much of it, like
Yeah, I
there's
mean
the
these
whole
things like
balance
there
structure.
are
Yeah.
there are metrics for all of this,
Totally.
and so somehow or another you have to find it in you to say it's been a problem that
Yeah.
I'm not aligned,
Yeah.
but now the market has told us it's done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that this has all kind of been a process for me. Like, okay, what is this? You don't know. I didn't know my worth, but I also didn't know what I was capable of until quite recently, because I didn't have that.
So let me
knowledge.
tell you about one other potential acquirer.
Yeah.
So the have you named the acquirers?
No.
No. One other potential acquirer could be you.
Yeah. So I tried that. I tried to buy it back.
And you may be able to fashion an offer that doesn't involve cash,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
where you turn the table, where he's got a $2 million liquidation preference, where if you sell it, maybe he gets the first 6 or 8 or $10 million out. Maybe if you generate a profit, he takes all of the profit above whatever's needed to invest in the business.
But then, who floats the burn right now?
So the burn you're telling me, you could be at break even in a month, right?
Yeah, but that's not our cash flow. Like that's
Yeah.
just like the money.
You'd have to raise capital.
Yeah.
You'd have to find someone who with you was willing to back you to buy him, but not for $2 million,
Yeah.
for a much smaller amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
That may be doable.
Yeah.
I think that this mic doesn't work, but I think that this conversation should continue. We have been up here for a little while, so I wanna wrap it up here. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I was in a situation where I had a co-founder that actually Andrew helped me through this as well. We weren't quite seeing eye to eye. It felt like, as I explained before, these startups are our babies. It felt like I was walking away from my baby, and it was the best thing I ever did. So if you end up having to do that, just remember, doors continually open.
Thank you.
Hopefully this will work. This will work out. Not hopefully. This will work out one way or another.
Thank you.
Hopefully this process for you has added a deeper sense of confidence in your own value, because I think that's a really important point that Andrew's highlighting. Like, your skills on the street are very valuable, and then your team is exponentially valuable. So, I think playing into that dynamic with your investor is an important thing to recognize.
Yeah. Thank you.
How about a big round of applause for Sarah and for Andrew for sharing this tonight. You guys can hang up here. We're going to wrap up. and head out of here.